We begin not with a theory, but with a nightmare. It is the morning of October 28, 1943. The world is at war, and the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard is a hive of frantic, high-stakes activity. But amidst the gray steel, the smell of diesel, and the rhythmic clanging of hammers, something impossible is happening to the USS Eldridge. Imagine standing on that pier. You see a ship, massive, tangible, a cannon-class destroyer escort, the pride of the American fleet. But then, the air begins to change. It's not smoke, and it's not the typical Atlantic sea mist. It is a luminous, sickly, neon-green fog. It doesn't drift with the wind. It seems to breathe. It begins to swirl around the hull of the Eldridge, clinging to the steel like a living thing, crawling up the masts and wrapping around the gun turrets. A low-frequency hum begins to vibrate through the soles of your boots. It's a sound so deep it feels like it's shaking your very DNA. Sailors on nearby ships stop what they are doing. They describe the air becoming heavy and ionized until the smell of ozone fills their lungs and tastes like copper. Then, the air itself begins to crackle with blue electrical discharges, static electricity so powerful that the hair on the sailor's arm stands straight up. And then, in a sudden, violent flash of azure light, the ship vanishes. It doesn't fade into the distance. It doesn't hide behind a curtain. It is erased from the physical space of Philadelphia. For several minutes, a multi-thousand-ton warship and every soul on board simply does not exist in our reality. Where did it go? More importantly, what did it find while it was gone? This isn't just a ghost story. It is the opening of the Philadelphia Rift. To understand the vanishing, we have to look at the desperation that forced the Navy's hand. We have to look at the invisibility war. Why would the U.S. Navy risk tearing a hole in the universe? Because in 1943, the Atlantic Ocean was not a battlefield. It was a graveyard. Nazi U-boats, the gray wolves of the Third Reich, were sinking Allied merchant ships faster than we could build them. The supply lines to Europe were being severed. If the U.S. couldn't protect its fleet, the war was lost. The Navy didn't just need better weapons, they needed a cloak of invisibility. They called it Project Rainbow. The goal, on paper, was simple. Use massive electromagnetic coils to bend radar waves around a ship. If a ship couldn't be seen by radar, it couldn't be targeted. But the scientists in the black budget rooms knew they were chasing something much more dangerous. They were chasing optical invisibility. We have to understand the pressure of the 1940s. Science was moving at a terrifying pace. We were a split second away from the atomic bomb, and the military was willing to pay any price for a tactical advantage. But there was a voice of dissent. Nikola Tesla, the director of the project in its early stages, began to notice something disturbing. He noticed that the magnetic fields didn't just affect the radar, they affected the biological clocks of the laboratory animals used in the trials. He told the Navy brass that while the steel would survive the torque, the human nervous system, essentially a delicate bioelectrical circuit, would not. He warned of the human element. He begged for more time. But the Navy saw only the U-boats and the mounting body count in the Atlantic. They had the machines, they had the math, and they had a crew of young, patriotic sailors who had no idea they were about to become the first human test subjects for a dimensional breach. To understand how a ship can vanish, you have to understand the source code of the world. In the early 1940s, two of the greatest minds to ever live were allegedly working on the same impossible problem, the unified field theory. Albert Einstein was the architect of general relativity, the man who explained the macro universe. Tesla was the master of frequency, the man who tamed the micro universe. Rumors within the archive suggest that these two men met in secret to solve a terrifying possibility: that gravity and electromagnetism are not separate forces, but different ripples in the same fabric. Tesla's work with high-frequency rotating magnetic coils provided the hardware. Einstein's math provided the map. Together, they had theorized a magnetic bottle, a localized area of space that would be disconnected from the rest of our universe. Tesla allegedly finished the blueprints in 1942, but as he sat in his room at the New Yorker, he realized the power was too great. He saw that this technology didn't just hide things, it shifted them into another phase of reality. Imagine a radio. If you are tuned to 101.1 FM, you hear the music, but 101.2 FM is also there, in the same room at the same time. You just can't hear it because you aren't in phase with it. Tesla believed he could change the phase of a ship. He didn't want to hide it, he wanted to move it out of our frequency. In our opinion, Tesla didn't just want to win a war, he had accidentally found the key to the multiverse. And the Navy was about to turn the key. For 12 years after the war, the Navy kept the secret perfectly buried. No one spoke of the Eldridge. No one spoke of the green fog. That is, until 1955, when an astronomer and researcher named Morris Jessup received a letter that would change his life and eventually end it. The letter was written in multiple colors of ink: blue, black, and red. It was filled with bizarre capitalizations, as if the writer was struggling to translate a non-human language into English. It was signed by a man named Carlos Miguel Allende. Allende claims to have been a sailor on the USS Andrew Forsyth, a ship that was docked directly next to the Eldridge during the experiment. He didn't just describe the vanishing, he described a teleportation. He claimed that while the Eldridge was gone from Philadelphia, it appeared for several minutes in the harbor of Norfolk, Virginia, hundreds of miles away, before snapping back. But Allende's letters focused on something much darker than travel. He described the freezing. He spoke of sailors who would suddenly stop moving in the middle of a meal or a conversation. They would become transparent, ghost-like, and physically stuck in time. He described a horrifying ritual called the laying on of hands, where other crew members had to physically touch their frozen comrades to pull them back into our reality. Allende wasn't just describing a military test. He was describing a reality that was beginning to unspool at the seams. And Morris Jessup was the only man brave enough, or foolish enough, to pull on the thread. This is the payoff for the human element Tesla warned about. When the Eldridge finally snapped back into the Philadelphia shipyard, the generators wound down and the green fog dissipated. The Navy officers who boarded the ship were met with a sight that has never been officially released, but has been whispered by those who were there. The ship was covered in a foul-smelling, iridescent slime that seemed to evaporate into the air. But the crew was broken. Some men were simply gone, leaving nothing but their boots and their uniforms on the deck, as if they had been poured out of reality. Others were wandering in a state of total mental collapse, their brains scrambled by the magnetic shear. But the most famous and terrifying detail, the one that still haunts the Navy's black vaults, is the molecular merge. 5 men were found physically fused into the steel bulkheads and decks of the ship. Because the magnetic field collapsed so suddenly, the atoms of the ship and the atoms of the human bodies rematerialized in the exact same coordinates. One sailor was found with his arm passing through a solid steel wall, his bone and the iron becoming a single fused material. Another was found fused from the waist down into the very floor of the engine room, his legs becoming part of the ship's foundation. They were literally rematerialized in the wrong place. Tesla had been right. The human biofield couldn't withstand the torque of a dimensional rift. The ship had survived, but the men had become part of the machine. If the Philadelphia experiment was just a tall tale, why did the government react with such extreme, lethal silence? When Morris Jessup began investigating Allende's letters, he wasn't met with a cease and desist. He was summoned to the Office of Naval Research in Washington. To his shock, the officers didn't tell him to stop. They showed him a copy of his own book, The Case for the UFO, which had been sent to them anonymously. The book was covered in handwritten notes by 3 different beings, Allende and 2 others. The notes discussed force fields, interstellar travel, and the merging of worlds. Jessup realized he was no longer looking at a ghost story. He was looking at a leak from the highest levels of the secret state. Jessup told his friends he was on the verge of proving that the Navy had accidentally discovered the secret of the ages, the bridge between our world and the next. But he never got to give his presentation. In 1959, Jessup was found dead in his car in a park in Florida. Carbon monoxide poisoning. It was ruled a suicide, but the details didn't add up. There was no suicide note. His research was missing, and the witnesses who saw him that morning said he was in high spirits, excited to finally reveal the truth. In the archive, we follow the pattern. When you get too close to the rift, you tend to vanish. Is any of this scientifically possible, or is it pure supernatural fantasy? In 2026, the answer is leaning toward a terrifying yes. Today, we have the science of metamaterials. These are man-made substances engineered to bend light around an object, effectively creating a cloaking device. We have already successfully made small objects disappear in laboratory settings. We have quantum tunneling, which allows particles to teleport through solid barriers. We have the Aharonov-Bohm effect, which proves that magnetic fields can affect matter even in areas where the field strength is 0. Tesla wasn't a magician. He was a physicist who was 100 years ahead of his time. He understood that reality isn't solid, it is a frequency. If you change the frequency of a ship, you shift its location in space-time. The Philadelphia experiment didn't fail because the ship didn't vanish. It failed because the Navy didn't know how to re-sync the crew. The rift was a success that was too dangerous to be allowed into public knowledge. It proved that our world is just one channel on a cosmic television, and the military had found the remote control. The Eldridge was eventually sold to the Greek Navy and later scrapped, but the rift remains open. If the Navy perfected this technology in the 1940s, what are they using it for today? Look at the modern reports of UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. We see craft performing maneuvers that defy the laws of inertia, appearing and disappearing on radar and to the naked eye at will. Are these visitors from another world, or are they the descendants of the Eldridge? Are we looking at the Tesla protocol finally perfected, 80 years after the first blood was spilled in Philadelphia? Tesla died a ghost in room 3327, but his unified field is the invisible foundation of the modern secret state. They took his notes, they took his life, and they took our future. But there is one more weapon. A weapon that doesn't just hide ships, but protects entire nations with a shield of pure light, or destroys them with a single beam from the heavens. Next, we dive into the most terrifying pillar of all. Next up, Pillar 6, the Death Ray. Was it a shield for humanity or the ultimate death machine? Subscribe to the Growth Archive. We are opening the vault. Next up, Pillar 6, the Death Ray.